Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're just going to let everyone get admitted here for a minute or so, and then we'll jump into our webinar for today. Okay, great. It looks like people are funneling in fine. So maybe we'll get started with some introductions, and then we can get into it while everyone joins us. So Amy, if you want to start by bringing up our slides for today. Perfect. Thanks, Amy. So hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our ecosystem mapping webinar this morning. My name is Jessie LaValle-Whiffen, and I am a conservation program specialist with Ducks Unlimited Canada's National Boreal Program. I'm joining you today from the Campbell River, BC region, and I would like to respectfully acknowledge the unceded traditional territories of the Wiwai-Kai, the Wiwai-Kwum, and the Kiwika First Nations. They are the traditional keepers of this land. Before we start, I'd just like to bring up a couple housekeeping notes. Your cameras and microphones will be turned off for the duration of this webinar. But please feel free to ask your questions through the Q&A feature. We will have time throughout the webinar for questions and for presenters to answer those questions. So thank you again for joining our discussion today. Before we start, I'd like to just say a few words and let you all know a little bit more about the CCLM, which I'm hoping that everyone today has had the opportunity to visit and use the website. The CCLM was launched in April 2020 and was built with the vision to connect practitioners working across Canada's diverse landscape to current and relevant resources. In 2019, 5 collaborating organizations came together and identified that there was no central place to share and exchange information and learnings in conservation and land reclamation. The founding members of the CCLM include Intertech Alberta, ECCC, representing the National Boreal Caribou Knowledge Consortium, the Natural Resources Canada, specifically the Canadian Forest Service, Ducks Unlimited Canada, and the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology, or NAIT, specifically in their Centre for Boreal Research. We also want to thank our other supporters who have kept the CCLM portal active and growing, including the Pathways Alliance, Alberta Innovates, the Grand Prairie Regional Innovation Network, the Alberta Land Use Knowledge Network, and the Northern Caribou Canada portal and Fuse Consulting. The result of this collaboration has been to create this powerful go-to site for all things related to conservation and land management. There are now over 3,500 resources within the portal, and this number continues to grow as we grow our membership. It has 4 main hubs and has welcomed over 100,000 users since it was launched. Now, if you're thinking I need to be a part of this or I need my resources to be linked in this tool, please feel free to reach out to us after this call, and we will figure out the best way for you to be a part of the CCLM. We are very pleased to be hosting this webinar today on ecosystem mapping and have 3 presenters joining us today. Each presenter will have 15 minutes to share their presentation and about 5 minutes at the end of their presentation to answer questions. We will also have a more formal Q&A after the presentations have been delivered. As I mentioned earlier, please pose any questions you might have in the Q&A feature, and we will try to get to as many as we can today. But if we don't get to your questions, please feel free to follow up with presenters afterwards. Today's webinar will be moderated by Shala Piper. Shala is the Director of Knowledge Exchange Partnerships with Fuse Consulting and has been involved with the CCLM since its beginning. So now that I've gotten all of our introductions out of the way and you all know who the CCLM is and what we're doing here today, I'm excited to present our first presenter, who is Becky Edwards. Becky is the lead remote sensing specialist for Ducks Unlimited Canada's National Boreal Program, with over 10 years of experience in remote sensing, utilizing Earth observation data for wetland mapping and monitoring to support environmental research and conservation in the boreal. She has a master's from Queen's University that focused on remote sensing and vegetation change in the Arctic, and a bachelor's of science from Vancouver Island University. As a lead remote sensing specialist, she has supported the remote sensing team in completing large-scale wetland inventories and has led field campaigns involving both ground-based and helicopter-supported wetland data collection. So with that, Becky, I will pass it over to you.
Great, thanks, Jessie. All right, thanks everyone for joining today. Like I said, my name is Becky Edwards, and today I'm going to present Ducks Unlimited Canada's boreal wetland mapping, an overview of methods, results, and conservation outcomes. Next slide. So for today, my presentation will first talk about Ducks Unlimited Canada and the type of work that we're involved in. Second is the wetland mapping methodologies, our current workflows. Third is connection to conservation. So how do we take the outcomes of wetland mapping to influence conservation on the ground? And for our next steps. Next slide, please. So a little bit about us. This is our mapping crew. So we have 2 wetland ecologists, 2 remote sensing analysts, a Grey Jay, and a helicopter. So we've conducted over 30 field campaigns across the boreal forest, collected over 10,000 field sites, and mapped over 146 million hectares of wetlands across the boreal, which I think is 25% of the boreal forest. So this is our specific mapping crew, but again, the boreal program does more than just wetland mapping, but you can check us out on our website if you have any questions about that. Next slide. So our wetland mapping follows a classification scheme at 3 different levels. So we have our level 1, which is our wetland upland split. We have our level 2, which follows the Canadian Wetland Classification System, or now the Canadian National Wetland Inventory, which is the 5 different wetland classes: fen, bog, swamp marsh, and open water. And third, we also have an enhanced wetland classification system. This is specific to DUC and covers 19 different classes, which breaks it down by different forms. So tree, shrubby, graminoid, different nutrient regime like rich and poor in fens, and also different tree types like in swamps. We have conifer, tamarack, hardwood, etc. Slide. So for our wetland classification, we use a multi-source and multi-temporal Earth observation data set to create large-scale detailed wetland maps of the area. And some of these areas can range up to 1 million hectares in area. We use optical data, radar, and topographic data, mostly by satellites, while employing best practices in scientific method. So we have published a couple papers. If you're interested, I can always get that to you as well. We also use machine learning algorithms that are trained and tested using reference data. This includes photo interpretation and fieldwork, and I'll talk more about those in a second. But essentially, we're using various amount of data sets stacked together, running a machine learning algorithm, training and testing it to have an output of a wetland classification. Next slide, please. So overall for our workflow, like I mentioned before, we have different Earth observation data sets, and there's a stack of data as we kind of look at various times throughout the year. So we do, like I said, multi-seasonal data. As we know, wetlands are quite dynamic, so having a good range of dates from early season to late season, we'll get a better idea of the different changes in wetlands. And we also have different reference data, again, photo interpreted, that is, I'll explain soon, and fieldwork. And then all that information is plugged into a machine learning algorithm. And we've played with various different types. In some of the later examples, we're looking at deep learning versus machine learning, or there's aspects of using different models like random forest versus XGBoost. If you're interested in getting more in the weeds, I'm happy to answer more questions about that. Then we also do an accuracy assessment. We look at the overall accuracy, but also the breakdown at different classes. So how are swamp doing compared to other classes and so on. And then we have our geospatial outputs. So in the top there, we have a map, a raster wetland classification. So that's a deliverable out of the workflow. But we can also create story maps. So this is another example of wetlands in Dene-Kusan in northern BC, a story map. And also just other decision support tools that we can create from wetland information. Because as we know, like wetland inventory is a baseline information that really opens the doors to many other products that can come out of there. Next slide. I just wanted to go a little bit deeper into the reference data, as I think these are obviously the really important when putting into our model. As we know, like the best data and the more accurate data we can get to train our models, the better the output's going to be. So we use photo interpreted methods. So this is a cost-effective desktop approach used to supplement field data. So obviously field data is our number one, the gold standard of information, but sometimes you can't have as much field data as you'd like. And so we supplement it with photo interpretation. This method requires various Earth observation data sets, an experienced wetland analyst that is able to digitize wetland polygons, like you see there on the left, about 1 hectare in size. And essentially, we first assign a wetland, non-wetland, then the 5 class, then the EWC. And this is done by not only like myself, but also another analyst, so that it's not just biased to one analyst's opinion. Next slide. Yeah, so for our, the gold standard of data is collected by helicopter. In the boreal forest, it is very difficult, it's remote, it's hard to get to. It's not like on the side of, the roadside wetlands that we get. So we do get to fly around in a helicopter, which is the coolest part of my job for sure. But this is an example. We have a wetland polygon in the top. And then on the right there, you can see the helicopter that gets really, really close to the ground, the surface. So we have our wetland ecologist that's looking at the species type and getting really good information about the different types of species. So in that zoomed up photo on the left, you can see that there's different water and grasses, but you also see buckbean in there. And buckbean is an indicator of fens. So then maybe something we would have thought as of marsh is actually a gramineid fen. And then we zoom all the way out and we can start dictating percent coverage, species height, the final class and form, and obviously taking site photographies. The one on the right is the overall main site at the end. And so all this information with the photo interpretation helps get that large scale wetland inventory accuracy that we're looking for. Next slide, please. So now I wanted to get into the connection to conservation. So after we've created these wetland maps, how do these go to influence conservation on the ground? So this is an example of wetland mapping for sustainable peat harvesting in Manitoba. We were contracted by the Manitoba government and funded through ECCC, the Forestry and Peatlands branch of Economic Development, Investment and Trade, and Natural Resources within the government of Manitoba, needed to assess the sustainability of peat harvesting activities in this region and required an improved inventory of these wetlands. So a wetland inventory was created for this region that is both valuable for conservation planning as well as sustainable land use planning. This is about a 1.1 million hectare region. It is also a priority area for wetland and waterfowl. And yeah, so the final EWC classification on the right there had an overall accuracy of 81%, which is really good at a 19 class classification, including uplands. One of the challenges was differentiating between bogs and poor fens. They can look very similar. Field data was integrated to improve these distinctions. So we actually ran the model with only photo interpretation data and then with photo interpretation and fieldwork to see how fieldwork improved the data. And what we found that there was an overall increase of 3% accuracy, but the main importance was that bogs and swamps improved drastically, qualitatively and quantitatively in this area. So that was really great to see, and obviously something we expected, the improvement of field data. Next slide, please. Another one I wanted to highlight is wetland mapping to support Indigenous protected and conserved areas. So this area is in northern BC called Dene Kusan. It's a proposed IPCA area. So Dene Ka Institute reached out to us to create a wetland inventory in 2018 that has been finished. With that inventory, we have also deployed ARUs or bird recorders in the area using the wetland information. And this is a map of where those locations are. This was with Audubon, the Land Guardians, Dane Daniela, and ECCC and Audubon. I think I said Audubon already. But yeah, and this was a really great project, but also shows the evolution and partnership. We started with a wetland inventory. We kind of used to, how can we use these products and keep the relationship going? And we do have future projects on the way together as well, which we're really excited about. Next slide. So next is the next generation of wetland mapping in Alberta. So this project is the Alberta Wetland Inventory pilots were completed by the Government of Alberta and contracted by DUC and the Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute, ABMI, to collaboratively develop methods aimed at meeting the minimum mapping standards of Alberta's wetland mapping. This project was led by EPA's Technical Committee and funded by the Wetland Replacement Fund. So our goal was to refine wetland mapping methodologies using AI to meet these standards. As we know, the current wetland inventory in Alberta is kind of like a different inventories all over Alberta at different years and different resolutions. So having one product will really help with wetland monitoring and wetland policy in the province. So this is an overview of the methods across the 4 study areas. So we had 4 pilots, each region in the Boreal and Prairies. And so this is just to show that we kind of use satellite data. We flew LiDAR, which was really exciting, and had training data based on the ABMI photo plots. It plugged that into both machine and deep learning to test them out, see how they did, and have the outputs of wetland maps and an accuracy assessment. Next slide, please. So for the results of this project, there is a link there, so you can look at the data and the user's guide as well that is available. So these pilot projects successfully tested advanced several AI methods to map wetlands using remote sensing in these 4 pilot areas. The top deep learning and machine learning models met the GOA standards of greater than 70% other than the parkland region. These new methods are advantageous because they can process large volumes of data efficiently and look at complex patterns within the wetlands. Machine learning requires higher accuracy of training data compared to deep learning. However, with more data, deep learning will keep getting better, whereas machine learning might peter off. So kind of exploring a hybrid method of both machine and deep learning is kind of where we think is the best spot to go. Machine learning actually outperformed deep learning at the form level, so looking at treed versus shrubby and so on. And in the Boreal, LiDAR had significant impact at the form level. Without it, we would not be reaching standards. That's a big one as well. And field data for validation is critical for the accuracy to meet the GOA standards. Just a small overview there. Next slide, please. Next and last project I'm going to highlight is wetland monitoring in Quebec. So this is called Télédecteur project. We'll develop and validate Earth observation-based methods and technologies to monitor aquatic, wetland, and terrestrial vegetation, along with shoreline erosion in the regions of the Contrecoeur Port expansion area. So again, the the Contour area is expanding, and with that, they want to make sure that they are monitoring wetland and terrestrial vegetation, aquatic grasses, and shoreline. So this is a big, huge initiative, which has been supported as a part of the Canadian Space Agency Smart Harbour Initiative in collaboration with the Public Services, Procurement of Canada, and Montreal Port Authority. So DUC collaborates with a multidisciplinary team of scientists from Hadfield, Arctus, Université du Québec, Trois-Rivières, and University of Victoria. And so essentially the idea is to take Earth observation data, monitor it, have an output, and be able to give this directly to the end user to monitor. Next slide, please. So some of the things that we are working on in terms of wetlands is Earth observation solutions involving multispectral and radar data as inputs into machine learning models to look at class and form. Development during the project will involve testing different inputs of spatial resolution. So how does medium resolution data do versus high resolution data? And this is important because medium resolution can be free and open source, and high resolution is expensive. So testing out both of those methods for the end user. And so for the wetlands, we are looking at data from 2021 to 2024, creating wetland class maps and form for each of these and look at change. We also have a 2008 map, that's the one on the left there, from DUC Quebec that has already done it in the area. So we do have a little bit of a time series happening there. Next slide, please. And another product that we're doing, because wetland monitoring was important, is we thought we would offer or look at monitoring wetland flooding using radar time series data, which creates seasonal and historical wetland inundation maps. This will help the end user flag areas of change to monitor. As we know, wetlands are really influenced by the amount of water that's on the surface. This could help us understand what has happened on from 2017 to 2024 and flag any areas in the future that we're seeing that are drying or becoming more wet. So again, we have the stack of radar images. We create maps of upland, wetland inundation, and permanent water on the inundation classification there. And then we have our inundation frequency on the right, which looks at something that's always flooded versus never flooded and everything in between, and you get this kind of range of frequency. So change detection will be used to monitor wetland class change and yearly outputs of the hydro period models to look at change and trend analysis to gain insight into long-term effects in the area. And last slide, please. And so, yeah, so that was a bunch of our case studies or current projects we're working on, but the next steps for us is the first one is expanding wetland inventories. So continuing to work with government, Indigenous communities, and industry to produce wetland products for conservation efforts. Potential opportunities in the future for us is ecozone-wide mapping in the Shield, which would possibly be in Manitoba or Saskatchewan, something that we're looking into. Advanced methodologies, so number 2, working on projects to produce new inventories in Manitoba. So that's a project we're underway right now. So we're extending that Interlake or that Manitoba project and testing different methods to see which one works better in this area. Third is wetland monitoring. So I showed a wetland monitoring project, but we would like to continue to work with different communities and land guardian programs at developing a monitoring workflow using remote sensing and on-the-ground measurements. And 4, expanding our partnerships. So establishing and strengthening partnerships with diverse groups across the boreal forest, including expanding efforts in the eastern boreal region as well. So we are getting some information or some projects out east, which we're really excited about. But partnerships and working with people to deliver the products is the reason why we create the inventories in general. So making sure that we're expanding those partnerships and continuing on those are really important. Last slide, please. Thank you. That is all. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thanks. I'll pass it over to Shala to facilitate any questions that have come through for Becky.
Thanks, Jesse. And thank you so much, Becky. I see a round of applause coming to you with emojis. Amazing visuals and a really good job communicating those complex methods. I have a question about those methods. You mentioned already using machine learning and deep learning and LiDAR. Are there any other emerging technologies or innovations, maybe some of what you talked about in your step two, that you're really excited about that you think will further advance wetland and sensitive ecosystem mapping?
Yeah, great question. There's so many. I mean, like in the last 10 years, remote sensing, has and methods have exploded in this area. But I think there's various different ways. So that Manitoba project that we're talking about is kind of looking at our workflows. So currently we've established using something called eCognition, which is a software that you pay for. But we love to build methodologies that are more open source and more flexible. And so that's something that we're exploring with that project. One thing that we're really excited though for hopefully the launch this year is the NISAR satellite, which is another radar satellite that's getting launched by NASA. The reason why it's so exciting is because it has like radar. Why it's so important is it can penetrate through some canopies because it's using radar in different wavelengths. So maybe the ones that we currently have can penetrate through shrub and so on, but NISAR has deeper, can penetrate deeper. And so that's exciting when you talk about swamps, something that could be more helpful. So we're excited to see when that comes out and the imagery and the possibilities that comes out with that.
Excellent. I'm sure lots of people on the call are interested to learn that that's coming up and they probably didn't know about it. So thanks for sharing. There's a question in the chat and I'll encourage lots of people to use the Q&A function as well to contribute questions. Ryan Brook is asking about wetlands that are prone to fire. Do you apply a different approach to direct mapping in that case?
Yeah, that's a great, it's something that we constantly come across, obviously, is burn in the area. In our previous inventories, we've mapped. So for example, when a fire goes through an upland or upland wetland area, it tends to really get the uplands, really well, and will change kind of the surface vegetation on the wetlands. But still with the imagery, you're able to pull out kind of the drainage of where the wetlands are. So we're confident still of being able to pick up, a wetland upland. But the signatures and the change of the vegetation on top of that can be sometimes difficult. We'll get error, essentially, error within the model within those areas. Yeah, it's actually really interesting. The Alberta one that I talked about, we had photo plot data from ABMI that was before the fires occurred, like, some older. So actually using old data before the fires happened helped the model distinguish what the new form was in the end, if that makes sense. So using that old historical data does help. So in saying that, I think every time you get to a new area with burns, you kind of have to assess how deep the burns are, how extreme they were, and kind of go from there. But I think it's just always going to be a challenge in some of the areas we work in.
Okay, great insights. I'll turn it back to Jesse for our next presenter, but we do have a 30-minute slot at the end, so hopefully we can ask a few more questions to Becky at that time.
Yeah, great, Shaw. Thank you. Yeah, keep popping questions into the Q&A, and if we have time at the end, we will return to them. So our second presenter today is Sarah Banks. Sarah has a bachelor's and a master's of science in physical geography from Carleton University. She has worked as a physical scientist at Environment and Climate Change Canada since 2014. And during this time, her research has focused on mapping and monitoring changes in wetlands using synthetic aperture radar. So with that, I will pass it over to Sarah to take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. As was mentioned, my name is Sarah Banks, and yes, I work out of the National Wildlife Research Center located at Carleton University in Ottawa. And I actually did officially start here back when I was doing my undergrad, when I was working with satellite radar to map wetlands, and I have pretty much been doing the same thing ever since. So I guess that's enough of an introduction. I'll get you to the next slide, please. Just to go over the organizational structure to provide some context for the type of work that I'm doing. There are several sections that operate out of the National Wildlife Research Center, and I'm part of the Geomatics Research section. That belongs to the Landscape Science and Technology Division, which is under the Wildlife and Landscape Science Directorate, and all of that is sort of within the Science and Technology branch at Environment and Climate Change Canada. Next slide, please. And the work that we do at the Geomatic Research section is incredibly diverse. Some of our key program areas, however, include nature-based climate solutions and ecosystem and disturbance mapping. For example, we're mapping coastal marshes across the Hudson Bay lowlands right now and conducting extensive ecosystem mapping in the Yukon and British Columbia. And all of that work is sort of grounded in rigorous scientific research and knowledge mobilization. So making sure that the work that we do supports evidence-based decision-making. We also prioritize client service and strive to answer not only what is happening on the landscape, but also, so what? Why does it matter? Why is it important to know this information? Next slide, please. So today I'm going to highlight a few examples of the research that we've been conducting and how we're mobilizing this knowledge. I'll start by talking about a paper that we recently published that was entitled New Insights into Distinguishing Swamps from Upland Forests Using Satellite Radar. Next slide, please. So most of the people on the call are probably already familiar with optical satellite sensors. That includes Landsat and Sentinel-2. These are great for detecting energy reflected or emitted from the tops of canopies. But under these conditions, it can be really challenging to distinguish forested uplands and wetlands. That's because they effectively look the same when they have the same species or are densely vegetated. Radar sensors, which Becky mentioned a few times, they actively transmit microwaves or radio waves that have the capacity to penetrate vegetation under the right conditions. And this is really important for detecting wetlands and monitoring change because it allows us to detect surface water and saturated soils more effectively, and both of which are obviously important indicators of wetland presence. Next slide, please. So here's how it works. When microwaves or radio waves strike a saturated soil or a surface water, the incident signal is preserved and redirected towards the trunk and then back towards the sensor. And this results in a bright pixel or a strong backscattered signal. In contrast, when you have a dry or rough surface, the scattering of the signal occurs in all directions, and that results in less of that original signal being returned towards the sensor, and as a result, you have a darker pixel. So that's obviously two very extreme conditions. In reality, the radar returns that we get from wetlands exist sort of along a continuum. But effectively, in order to separate swamps and uplands, two things must be true. The radar signal must penetrate the canopy, and there has to be a detectable difference in the power that we get from areas that have saturated soils or surface water present versus uplands. And that really depends on the environmental characteristics and the sensor that you're using to measure those differences. So the extent of surface water within the area, the tree density, and also the radiometric precision of the sensor. Next slide, please. So for this study, our goal was to try and figure out under what conditions those two criteria are met. So we compared the relative importance of acquisition timing and sensor and or data type using 3 satellites. So we have RadarSat-2, which is a Canadian satellite, has irregular spatial coverage, but reasonably good canopy penetration, combined with an excellent noise floor. If you're not familiar with what noise floor is, this is sort of a performance limiting factor of the sensor, which tells us about the radiometric precision. And you can kind of think of it like trying to hear someone talk in a crowded room. The noise floor kind of represents the volume of everyone else that you're trying not to hear. So a better noise floor is sort of equivalent to a quiet room. We have Sentinel-1, which provides a regular and consistent spatial coverage. So this is sort of the workhorse of the community mapping wetlands right now. It's definitely very, very useful. But the way that the microwaves are transmitted, it results in a lower penetration capacity. And compared to RadarSat-2, it also has a worse noise floor. We also looked at ALOS-2, which provides irregular coverage again, but excellent penetration because it's operating at the longer wavelength L-band. And so that's the same frequency that the upcoming NISAR mission that Becky mentioned will operate as. So we expect this satellite to offer good wetland detection capacity. Next slide, please. So basically, we just collected time series data from all these different sensors over a study area in the Bay of Quinte, Ontario, and we had really good reference data representing swamps and upland forests. This was a great site to conduct this study because the tree species and the densities of trees are really diverse. So basically, we did a really simple comparison. We used the acquisitions as inputs to random forest, a machine learning classifier that's sort of a standard workhorse within the community. And we just compared accuracy by date and by sensor. So this visual is just showing you that we're feeding the inputs, the bands, and the derivatives from an individual date and sensor to the model. And if you just go to the next slide, this would be another sort of model where we're feeding in a different set of inputs from a different sensor and different date. You can go to the next slide, please. So what we found is that the acquisition timing makes a huge difference. Many of the swamps in the study area that we looked at are deciduous and ephemeral. So once the canopy leaves emerge, this decreases the penetration capacity of the radio or microwaves at C-band, which is the frequency that RadarSat-2 operates at. At the same time, surface water extent is sort of declining through time, and that increases signal scattering at the surface and decreases the return strength, causing confusion between swamps and upland forests. And if you just turn on, there's two visuals that pop up. So we kind of see two kind of different models. Ones that achieve, acceptable accuracies, and this is when the leaf off of the canopy and high water levels is happening. And then the other models where we see pretty poor performance, and that's when we have leaf on and low water levels. Next slide, please. And we also found, obviously, that the sensor and the data type really matters too. So here we're comparing the model accuracy across the different sensors throughout the growing season, and the black box compares the models for acquisitions that were taken around the same time. And unfortunately, what we can see is that with Sentinel-1, we have significantly lower accuracies compared to RadarSat-2 and ALOS-2. The reason for that is that the way in which the microwaves are transmitted by Sentinel results in decreased penetration through the canopy. And also, of course, it has sort of a worse noise floor compared to these other satellites. But even if we look at ALOS-2, where we expect really good penetration capacity because it's operating at a longer wavelength, we also see a seasonal change in the accuracy for swamp versus forest. And really what this is telling us is that the presence of surface water is absolutely critical for radar-based wetland detection, which is sort of a bit of a eye-opening thing that we found, is that it's not just important to have radar data in the model, but also optimally timed radar data, especially for detecting ephemeral swamps. Next slide, please. So some of the key takeaways from this study are that swamps are probably underrepresented in the current maps that we have, even if radar is included. Sentinel-1, while it does offer great spatial coverage, great temporal repeat coverage through time, it's not acquired with the optimal characteristics, mainly the polarization, and does not have the best noise floor. So even though we do have that data covering all of Canada every 12 days, it's pretty limited in terms of wetland detection for swamps versus upland forest. Even with ALOS 2 composites, which are now widely available, and again are acquired at that longer wavelength, so should be optimal for this application, they can be limited by poorly timed or inconsistent acquisitions. Again, surface water is super important for detecting that difference between swamps and upland forests. And finally, I think that it's important to recognize that these sorts of effects may not always be apparent because of biases that exist within the training data itself. So if we restrict our analysis, we restrict our sample to sort of these open canopy swamps that are easy to detect, we may not be able to see these things that exist. Next slide, please. So obviously that was a very quick and simple explanation of the study that we did. If you're interested in finding out more, this was published in Remote Sensing of Environment, so is now available. Next slide, please. And just to quickly mention that we did also look at incorporating the entire Sentinel-1 time series for this study area and for looking at swamp versus upland forest. And we came to a similar conclusion. These are fundamental limitations of the data that we have with Sentinel-1. Next slide, please. Now, looking ahead, I just wanted to quickly talk about a couple upcoming research priorities. Next slide, please. One of the things that we are really excited about is developing a benchmark data set, with the goal being to provide a consistent and objective way for the community to compare data sets, algorithms, workflows, basically to help validate the improvements that we are making and to track progress with wetland mapping within Canada. Next slide, please. We're also working towards modeling plant structure and above ground biomass in wetlands with a focus on non-forested wetlands, which are underrepresented in the literature right now. So we're currently comparing different hierarchical modeling approaches using a range of different data sources and measurement tools. Next slide, please. And before I wrap up, I just wanted to quickly share a few examples of ongoing knowledge mobilization efforts within our group. Next slide, please. We're collaborating with the Yukon government right now on wetland mapping. One of the products we're really excited about is a certainty gradient map, which will help us identify key field sites for ground truthing and validation in the future. Next slide, please. We've also developed an in-house data management system to store, manage, and share data that can be available locally or via custom web applications. Next slide, please. And finally, we've created a Survey 123 form based on the Canadian Wetland Classification System, the CAMP model by Kelly Bona, along with other opportunistic sampling questions. So if you're interested in collecting and sharing wetland field data, I encourage you to check it out. We're currently working on improving the user experience, but the survey should be up and running before everyone starts fieldwork in the summer. So I'm very excited to see if people are interested and can collect some more field data for us. And I don't have a final slide, but I would just like to say thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you, Sarah, for your presentation. I'll pass it over to Shala again to facilitate any questions that may have come through.
Thanks so much, Jessie. And thank you, Sarah. Again, round of applause is coming in. We don't have any questions in the Q&A, but we have some prepared questions. And I thought you mentioned the NISAR satellite that Becky had shared was a new emerging technology. So I thought I'd pose that same question to you. What advances are you excited about? Maybe it's NISAR or another emerging technology to improve the accuracy of wetland mapping.
Well, like Becky, everyone who works with radar and does wetland mapping is waiting with bated breath to for the NISAR data to start coming in. It's going to be absolutely critical for detecting some of those cryptic wetlands that we just do not have the data right now to effectively map. So with NISAR, we will get 12-day repeat radar with good penetration capacity. So we have both the time element, we have the penetration capacity. So I think it's going to be a real game changer, especially because that data is going to be free and open. So really excited, just like everybody else, and waiting for that launch date, which has been delayed and delayed and delayed.
Okay, thanks for that additional context. And it sounds like that will be huge in conservation. You mentioned a little bit about seasonal changes like that, water being present as being a complicating factor. What about human activity and climate variables that complicate the task of consistently monitoring these areas?
Well, I think that's something that the community is sort of shifting towards, is incorporating more time series data. And that's the one thing that I am really excited about with radar, is that you can track phenological changes throughout a growing season very well and at a high temporal frequency. So with optical data, you have cloud cover and other haze complicating factors. So to get that time series, it can be more challenging, although you can incorporate acquisitions over multiple years. Sort of, I think it's going to be really important moving into the future, trying to capture those short-term changes that are a result of human activities and climate change, which I think radar has a good capacity to do so, as long as it's acquired with, sort of the optimal penetration capacity and a good noise floor to account for those effects.
Excellent, thanks. And one last question, in areas of limited ground truthing, how can we maintain high levels of accuracy and reliability in sensitive area mapping of all kinds? So maybe even broader than wetland mapping. Any ideas?
Well, I really liked Becky's explanation, which, there's a lot that we can get in terms of reference data from air photo interpretation, but going on the ground, I think we cannot forget the importance of going on the ground and seeing what's there, because we just simply cannot interpret everything from high resolution air photos or even drone imagery. It can be really challenging. So even though we've become more efficient, I think that it's really important to recognize that we just simply cannot forget to go out into the field and really validate what we're seeing and what we're saying is a certain class label, especially if we want very detailed classification maps with multiple classes. Ground data is just critical, and it will always be critical in my mind.
Okay, so maybe an opportunity for Survey 123 to help citizens submit their local data and Indigenous communities to participate with all of that amazing data that they have as well. Okay, thank you. Back to you, Jessie.
Great, thanks, guys. Our third and last presenter today is going to be Dave Blaine. Dave is a research associate. Is a research associate at the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology with a passion for visual storytelling. His academic journeys spanning archaeology, geographic information systems, and new media studies has shaped his unique approach to blending research, technology, and multimedia design. Holding degrees from the University of Calgary, the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, and Athabasca University, along with certifications in photography and remotely piloted aircraft systems, Dave brings a multidisciplinary perspective to his work. Additionally, with experience in emergency management, wildlife conservation, heritage resource management, and field science, Dave specializes in transforming complex information into clear, compelling narratives. Whether through maps, photographs, infographics, or videos, he leverages his skills in communication, graphic design, research, and analytics to create engaging, accessible visual content that informs and inspires. So with that, Dave, I'll let you take it away.
Sure, thank you. Let me just share my screen. You should be seeing the landing page for our project with the video montage. I'm getting thumbs up. Perfect. All right. I will launch into it. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me to join you all today. So what I want to talk about is the Northern Landscapes Sensitivity Atlas. This project actually began as an emergency management project that was seeking to unify data about different landscapes of risk and for the province of Alberta. As many of you, I'm sure you recall how COVID upended pretty much everything. Our partner was compelled to back out and we were left with a funded project with no partner. This is where I always give kudos to NAIT's own Kevin Kimball, who also was on the CCLM board with the Center for Boreal Research. He leveraged his connections in the north with the idea of perhaps we take it away from the disaster emergency management focus and take a broader view, a whole society view that incorporated all the data that we could absorb towards the end of building net benefit analyses. So this is how we came to pivot from that original first concept to the project that you see today. It was a 3-year NSERC funded project. We are in our last month before delivering it to our project partner, the Sahtu Renewable Resources Board in the Sahtu settlement region of the Northwest Territories. And yeah, that's the background, and we'll launch into that. Unlike the projects that you've heard about this morning, this is more of a toolkit, a data management workflow system, and a content curation system. So it aims to cast a very, very broad net that will give users the ability to find, to harvest, to filter, and to make sense of huge archives of data. And taking words from my emergency management colleagues to create, to compile all of that into a single point of truth that is contextualized within the local community perspective of the groups that are using it. So I won't belabor too much of the text. This story map is publicly shared, and I'm happy to provide the URL so that anyone watching can parse through it at their leisure. What the system does is it harvests authoritative data, and that comes from 3 broad pillars: from open data coming from government, whether that's provincial, federal, territorial, data that is made available from NGOs, from research facilities, post-secondaries, anybody and everybody that has open data available to be interacted with. The system is designed to harvest these. It also works with legacy projects and research data, where we have communities that have undertaken their own research over decades and have a lineage of research that is available to them. Much of this is even in analog formats and may not be straightforward or easy to leverage in a digital system. We work with these as well. And then the traditional knowledge and citizen science component of it, this is where we can use an online system like this one in order to stream data directly from users. As I always say, it begins with discovery. We launched this project with the intention of running an entire year-long discovery phase where we participated in collaborative field work with our project partners, where we actually presented ourselves to the communities for roundtable discussions, community meetings of every kind. I cannot overstate how much we have appreciated the energetic collaboration of our partner in the Sahtu Renewable Resources Board. They are delightful, gleeful matchmakers. We have met so many other institutes and research facilities and government agencies that all come in as partners with SRRB, and we've had a great pleasure to collaborate with them. But so there you have the application. Long story short, this is a large system designed to facilitate access to different kinds of data for communities. That's challenging. I'm sure, as you can imagine, there is much data out there. It's in a lot of different silos. Many of those silos are mutually competing. All of them have different concepts of operation, different data management approaches, different naming conventions. And indeed, some data are duplicated from one organization to another. So simply making sense of all of that, working one's way through it, and finding the data that is of greatest interest or concern to the user, this is the system that we decided to build. I've often said, like, wouldn't it be nice if we had the Star Trek library computer system where you could simply just call out and say, computer, I'd like to know everything there is to know about the Bathurst caribou herd. And it would politely say working, and perhaps a minute or an hour later, analysis complete, and you would have what you had asked it for. Regrettably, that's not likely to happen in my lifetime, perhaps not even in my children's. But so we dialed that aspiration back to a point where we could actually build a robust tool. So what you see here is an early version of some of that software that we created that is designed to harvest from specifically identified geospatial directories. So you got ECCC there, Government of Canada, Natural Resources Canada, Transport Canada, everybody's got data. And from those directories, we worked with our community partner to identify what we called themes that were of concern to the community. And in the interest of not overburdening users with too much choice, we decided, all right, 8 themes and no more. So we broke everything that's in these tens of thousands of lines long data directories into animal, earth, fire, ice, land, people, plants, water. And when a category is selected, then it is filtered. So you can go from dozens of directories with thousands of map layers and identify those data layers that are of greatest importance to you. I will share this little video. This really gives a good impression of, come on. My apologies. Let me just, there's a lot of data cranking through this this site. Let's go back, restart it. Here we go. So you can see the first iteration of the code is simply pulling every single map layer that was in those 9 directories that I mentioned above. And I mean, it's a mess. It's like heaving a water balloon at the wall and having every one of these layers, it's still drawing. And then the next step is to contextualize it. So now we have all of those same layers, but now very straightforward process. It is now clipped to the Sahtu. So this illustrates our process. We're casting a very wide net. Part of that is informed by my background as an archaeologist with training in anthropology and other social sciences. It's not my job to decide which data is relevant and which data may be trivial. because I'm not from here. I don't have that lived experience. I don't have that perspective. So we start out casting as wide as we can, and then in discussion and collaboration, we identify what is of greatest concern, greatest relevance to our collaborators. So there you have challenges. I'll skip quickly forward just to go through this one. I always get a kick out of this. Who among us is old enough to remember digital tapes? That legacy data that I talked about is an enormous challenge, and we have just such rich quantities of legacy data that are in slowly demagnetized, outmoded digital formats. And this has been another focus of the project, to harvest that, to salvage that, and put that into the system as well. In much the same way that your doctor will order a battery of blood tests and labs the first time she meets you. She's establishing a baseline for your current condition, your health. Well, we have these rich granular baselines, don't we? And some of them go back decades, even generations. So we want to be able to put that into the system so we can also see now what is current and where things were before, informing new analyses for change and difference over time. Because we're concerned with conservation here, here is one of our interactive applications that we created with discussion with the SRB. This is in collaboration with Aurora College's Petroleum Histories Project. And what you're seeing here is a comprehensive dashboard, entirely interactive, where we can identify wells and legacy oil and gas infrastructure within the Sawtooth settlement area. And it's organized according to its responsible regulator. So Orogo being the Office of the Regulator of Oil and Gas Operations in the Northwest Territories, and of course the Canada Energy Regulator. And this was requested of us by our collaborators. They want to know which doors to knock on, which telephone numbers to call, so they can find which agency is responsible for this slowly deteriorating centuries worth of infrastructure in the territories. And it's very straightforward to use. We can dive straight into the Norman Wells proven area, where you can see just about everything is under the Canada Energy Regulator, much of it belonging to Imperial Oil and its subsidiaries. And we can find granular detail about each one of these wells, how old it is, when it broke ground, what its unique identifier is. Another purpose of this tool, I have right here, every single attribute in this map is in plain language. I will tell you, it's one of my favorite stories to tell. When I first started looking at this published data from Imperial Oil, I hadn't the first clue what a spud date was. It made no sense to me. So I had to look that up. Oh, this is the moment where the drill bit broke ground. So when did we just say the drill broke ground? In this year. And now all of that data that is inaccessible because of industry or disciplinary jargon is now in plain language and accessible to the communities and the users. So, talked about that old data. I mentioned traditional knowledge and citizen science. This is, once again, this project is collaborative. It is informed by the needs and the wants of the communities that we work with. So this is why we went from that very broad view that I mentioned to a more dedicated and targeted approach to that 100 years of oil and gas infrastructure and what is going to happen as the hardware deteriorates, as temperatures climb, as permafrost thaws. What do all these different factors mean, and what is it going to look like when we take the environmental data and the industry data and the input from traditional knowledge keepers and layer those things one on top of the other, and then we see what shakes out. I do have a application, an interactive application that will probably be of interest to the audience. I'm not at liberty to share it yet with you because we haven't yet delivered this project to our partner, but I can share this. This is just one of the applications that we built where we were looking at the changes over time in reduction in surface vegetation and where that intersects with general temperature increase. And we identified from those two intersections 14 wells that may be at risk if it turns out they are situated over a permafrost layer that may be deteriorating. Another challenge we discovered is the maps for permafrost in the Sahtu are inexact at best because the permafrost in this region is not continuous. So the map may say with a polygon that, yes, there's permafrost here. We don't have ground truthing to prove that. So we can take other factors of data and identify with a straightforward back office analysis to identify items that may be at risk. And this is the other power of this tool in order to inform that decision-making about resource allocation and project prioritization, because we simply don't have enough money to go helicoptering all over this territory. We have to identify, regrettably, through this kind of a triage approach, how we're going to pick and choose which areas that we focus on. The system is also multimedia. It's also across the web. So you can see here, one of our collaborative projects was with the Petroleum History Project. So we can click on one of these items and we can go to a publication through Active History. So our publications, in collaboration with the Northwest Territories Environmental Studies Fund, you can click the buttons and gain access to our reports straight from this hub. You can find our collaborators in the hub. You can interact with dashboards and web maps in the hub. And it also provides a venue for rich multimedia storytelling. And that's really where this is the work that I get up in the morning for, is to be able to show what this project could be like for its collaborators and its users. I like to say the map is not the territory, but a multimedia experience such as this, it brings us a little bit closer to appreciating that what we're dealing with here is home, and it is teeming with history and story and knowledge and value. And that's not necessarily well represented with vector and raster data alone. So we build these immersives into the system so that when we perform our community engagement, we can inform the public about how special this place is and why the research we're doing matters. And you see the map updates with every location as we scroll through the media. Our final item moving forward, the next steps in our case is we will be migrating these web mapping applications, all of these data, these interactives, the story, the media, and the cleaned data that we harvested from the Sahtu that we have cataloged and made searchable and are going to return to our partners so that they can go forward with this tool. And aspirationally, this will take a form in which none of my pictures or videos or maps are in it because it's informed in a multivocal way by the collaborators and the people of the Sahtu themselves as they move forward. And it will be migrated into the SRB's Neonepene Geospatial Hub, which you can also follow the link to at the end. And that, I think pretty much covers it. So thank you all.
Thanks, Dave. That was super interesting. I really appreciated your use of visuals in telling that story. Shalab, maybe we have time for one specific question for Dave, and then we'll shift over to more of our panel discussion after that.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I just echo that beautiful presentation, Dave. That was a lot of really beautiful imagery, and I feel like I experienced that territory a little bit through that story map. So thanks very much. I'm curious about those other forms of knowledge that you mentioned. So I'm going to just adapt the question I've asked Becky and Sarah already, but basically you are innovating in the space of collecting old data in old formats or analog data or Indigenous knowledge keeper information. And can you tell us what's exciting there? What do you want to share? What are you, waiting with bated breath for so that you can do that even better in the future to map wetlands and sensitive ecosystems?
If you don't mind, here we'll turn share on again. You see this this little map gallery right here. Let me point your attention to this image. So this is along the Bear River, between Great Bear Lake and the Mackenzie River. There's this 9-mile portage in which nothing but a very low draft jet boat can get up and down. This barge landing was critical in the process of extracting uranium ore from mines in Port Radium on Great Bear Lake and transferring it down the Bear River to ports further downstream. And that was active from the 1950s until 1981. This location was surveyed by representatives from the government of Canada and found to be irradiated, even by the mid-1990s. No subsequent analysis that I'm aware of has been done, but you can appreciate there was radioactive material sitting here on these docks, waiting until enough of a shipment was available to be shipped further down. That's a sobering place to be, because the idea that that looming specter may be hovering over top of this absolutely beautiful landscape is as off-putting as it is awe-inspiring. My point is that had we not had our Indigenous knowledge keepers showing us around with that boots on the ground knowledge, that comprehension of the history of the landscape and what's being done on it and to it, we would not have found this location. And there is an official map of contaminated sites. This location is not on it. So that is probably the most poignant representation of the importance of leveraging the traditional knowledge and that living history that still exists into this project, and indeed I conjecture many other projects, because that perspective is what adds greater nuance and greater dimension to our ability to decide what it is that we're going to do with the resources that we have. If an entire cross-section of society has been excluded, then all of that knowledge, that brilliance, and that genius is not contributing to our better understanding and a better approach to our stewardship of the land.
And which is similar to the answer that we heard. NISAR satellite, excited about that, but also ground truthing. And Becky and Sarah said the same thing. So yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Jesse, do you want me to jump right into a question for the panelists?
Yeah, sure. That sounds great.
Okay. I thought maybe we'd follow that theme about collaboration. And we'll allow, maybe in this first row round, we'll have Becky answer, and then Sarah, and then yourself, Dave. But what are the next major steps or collaborations that you believe are needed to improve wetland mapping, sensitive area mapping, all of those things on a global scale? Becky, do you want to start us off with an answer to that one?
Sure, yeah, no problem. Yeah, I think there's just so much room for collaboration, and I think sometimes we've been noted, like, DUC has been known for like being a boundary organization where we work with academics to like transfer that knowledge to community or something like that, like being in between people. Because I think especially like there's so much data coming out. Everyone's doing wetland something or other, and it's being published. And I think sometimes when it's published, it's left and no one knows how they can access it, how they can use it, and stuff like that. So I think my biggest thing for that is that, we should be applying for funding, or there should be more opportunities for funding where you have organizations that work directly with end users, or keeping yourself directly with end users to make sure that the products that you're building are collaborative, but also getting used in the end, right? Like there's so much data that goes out there that actually doesn't get used on the ground. And I think that's too bad. And so, yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, thanks. Sarah, what do you think about the collaborations that are needed to move us forward in this space of mapping sensitive areas and wetlands?
I just wanted to mention that, just thinking about how we could move towards more consistent definitions between different provinces and different agencies, different groups. I think that one of the challenges that we face is that people use slightly different definitions, slightly different validation techniques, slightly different criteria for saying something is a rich fen versus a poor fen. How do we make that more consistent? I think is something that we as a community have to kind of reconcile with. Because it's impossible for any one group to go out and collect training data for the entire country. We do have to coordinate, and I think one of the challenges that we have to kind of face is what are all these different definitions? Can we come up with some kind of consistent methodology that we can all adopt and use and kind of contribute together towards again, maybe a benchmark data set that we can all benefit from? I think that would be really useful.
Excellent. And very practical. We can action that. I love that. Dave, anything to add there around the collaborations needed to improve mapping?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I was mentioning prior to the meeting, like I am not a programmer. I do not have that data, that capacity. It's completely intractable to me. So I have relied on a variety of supporters in order to direct this project to its intended outcome. So we have just in our team at NAIT, we have a water scientist, we have a master's of heritage and an archivist who is also a digital humanities scholar, helping with visualizing the human component of this data in a variety of different ways. We have an environmental engineer, and indeed, yes, we also have a programmer in the form of full stack developers and software customizers. So the entire project, because it is as nuanced and diverse as the landscape we're trying to represent, has to be collaborative and it has to be multidisciplinary. And I conjecture many of us here are working in multidisciplinary teams, but I think that's something that really needs to be elevated, is that variety of expertise really is required in order to be able to give a more accurate representation of the landscape, so that the communities that will benefit from these map projects and these data outputs will get the most value possible from it and be able to make the best informed decisions from it.
Yeah, excellent. I agree. And that idea of making the deliverables accessible and useful to local communities is really important. I think we have time for one more question. And I'll hopefully have answers from all three panelists again. What strategies are needed to better integrate Indigenous knowledge and community mapping into what we call official data sets and into decision-making tools? Would anyone like to step forward? And yeah, I see you've unmuted. Becky, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I don't mind going first, Dan. Yeah, no, I think that's a really important question. We've all talked about collaboration and partnership, and I don't know why I'm mentioning funding again, but sometimes I think that can be a restriction when working with communities. As we know, the timing of funding, applying for funding, like being successful. But I think being able to apply funding for or with community and making sure that that partnership doesn't just end when the funding ends, trying to seek additional funding as it goes on to build those long-term partnerships, because I think that's where the change can really happen, I think. And one of the things I said that we're trying to work on with in Dene Kusan in northern BC with Dene Institute and the Land Guardians is working more with the Land Guardians to like do Wetland 101, workshops and intro to GIS and stuff like that. And, they can ask us questions, any GIS questions they have, anything like that, where it's like, we're more of, we don't have funding with them right now, but they can always come to us and ask us questions. So making sure that it goes beyond the funding. And what was I gonna say? Oh yeah, and like in terms of the data collection that like Sarah was mentioning, we've talked about before, is trying to establish methods with the Guardians to collect various data. Is like we don't have to fly around in a helicopter all across the north, and so many of these communities are starting to build their Guardian programs and work together. So like how can we all work together to gather data we're all interested in? And so yeah, that's what I would say with that one.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks.
I'll jump in.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks. Sorry, so it's just something that Becky said. Like my first trip up to Norman Wells, I met an elder who said, you know what? People come and people go. Like people come up, we tell their stories, and we never see them again. Last year, there was this graduate student that came up. I guess she graduated because I never heard from her again. And that just made me so upset. And like coming from the academic side, where I appreciate exactly how difficult it is to unseat monies from the public trust in order to carry on and evergreen our projects. That's hard. And I try to be as upfront with our collaborators and our community partners as I can that, you know what, you may not see me for a while, but you have a robust tool that you can use. And that was always the end result. On the assumption that this would not get funded after next month, they still have tools that they can use with all the documentation, all the training, video tutorials, absolutely everything that we've made has been made with the user in mind. And as another side of that is the discussion of the data sovereignty as we talk about leveraging traditional knowledge in the discussion of, how are we going to prioritize this development project? Like you want a pipeline to go through here. It turns out that's going to bisect an entire traditional landscape. So move it a bit to the left. Like these are problems and situations we want to work with, but we don't want to share that knowledge willy-nilly across the open web. So with the attitude to maintaining that sovereignty, what we've presented is a tool that has an online workflow that is geared toward public sharing and elevation of community stewardship. We also have the offline desktop workflow where data that is private and sovereign can remain private and sovereign, and that decision is at the discretion of our community partners.
Thanks, Dave. Sarah, did you want to add anything about incorporating Indigenous knowledge into or an integration into data sets?
Well, what's coming to my mind in the moment is that it's really important, again, to collaborate and to try and avoid engagement fatigue. So having multiple different organizations going to the same community again and again and again and again, and, just perhaps thinking more about how we can coordinate our efforts so that, we can make lasting relationships and, avoid again that engagement fatigue of many, many, many different people going for similar but slightly different reasons. I think that that's really something that we should all consider as a community.
Thanks so much. We have a question from Ian Dodd in the Q&A, and thank you, Becky, for responding. We're going to wrap up now, but presenters, if you would like to respond to any of the questions in the Q&A, please feel free to do that. I will thank you once again and turn it back to Jessie.
Yeah, thank you everyone again for your time today and presenting. It was a great discussion, and thank you, Shala, as well for moderating the Q&A. I also wanted to mention that there is a survey following our webinar today. Amy has put it in the Q&A, so it'd be greatly appreciated if you could take a moment to respond to that survey. It will just help us, know what you guys are interested in terms of future topics for CCLM webinars. And you can also request to be contacted there as well if you have any questions or would like more information about the CCLM or our webinars or resources. So please stay tuned to the CCLM for more knowledge exchange webinars. We will have more coming to you in the fall, and check out the portal where you can stay up to date on other upcoming events and find resources for whatever work it is that you do. So thank you again to all our presenters and everyone for taking the time to join us today, and have a good rest of your morning or afternoon, wherever it is you may be. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.